Hi everyone, it's that time of the week where I'm going to try and preview. Well, I'm not actually, because there's not very much going on this weekend, which is the 25th and 26th of March 2023. I'm going to do something slightly different. Hopefully one or two words might resonate with some and might be able to help others, but just going to draw on some experience. But firstly, let's just go through this. I picked out 3 events. I've had a look at everything. I've looked at European athletics, world athletics, runner space, flow track, para 10, open track, various places to look. Run Britain. Just looking at various races going on and events going on this weekend. Can't come up with a lot. On Saturday at Sefton Park, Liverpool, is the schools' home international between England, Wales, Scotland, Ireland. That's those that finished in the top 8 of the junior and inter age group races at the English schools last week will be competing for the England teams. On Sunday, there's various road races. I picked out the Cardiff Bay 10K. That might be quite quick as usual, so I'm sure we'll draw some good runners to that. Hastings Half Marathon, that's got a tradition of some good performances in the build up to spring marathons, etc. So those you could look out for those. But putting all that to one side, I thought, well, we're scratching around for events. So what should I do? And I was listening to the Sunday podcast with Ollie Lum and Matt Seddon, and they were interviewing Jake Smith, who's run 28:01 for 10K and 2:11 dead for the marathon. One of the best young distance running prospects in the country. And Jake's gone through quite a difficult spell in terms of what he refers to as Red S, which is perhaps overtraining and underfueling, to put it in simple terms, and having a particularly bad time with some stress fractures, injuries, and just feeling really flat and struggling. And so I thought it was really brave of him to talk about that, because you don't get many male top athletes talking about their problems and issues that they've had, so fair play to him. But it made me think, and I've come up with something that I occasionally need reminding of, which are things that happen as a coach and team manager. And I've come up with 10, I don't know, words of advice, experiences, whatever you want to call them, that might be useful to others, that have just been underlined recently through some of the activities that I've been involved in. Just giving the dog wants to play down here, which doesn't help really when you're doing a little interview video recording. I mentioned the SIAB, the Home International Schools, and comes an age group success is linked to that. And the first, number one, come across against is the English schools, for example. Top 8 automatically go for the England team. So 8th is a success, 9th is a failure, and there's plenty of others within that race hoping and putting all their hopes and aspirations into finishing in that top 8 and getting their first international. At Tunbridge, we've had quite a few over the years that are doing it, and apart from perhaps the odd exception, I don't think it's done them much good getting that international vest. They've struggled to maintain that. As you know, it's very rare the best at that age become the best seniors. I think some of the age group success is built on ability and talent rather than just sheer good, consistent hard work over a number of years. So it's a bit skewed in what it's rewarding in a way. And I think it's really important. And I saw a few pretty much in tears at the weekend. It went backwards. We were aiming at the top 8, etc. And I think it's important to remember that it's not your young career is not defined by one race or one day. If you don't achieve, it's not the end of the world. If you do achieve, great, but keep it in perspective, because that will hand you some perhaps expectancies from yourself going forward that will put a little bit more pressure on you, and that is something to deal with. So whether you've succeeded or not doesn't really matter in the great scheme of things. It's nice and You know, I was excited as any other coach or team manager seeing young kids get their first England kit and lining up against others. But, you know, looking back, were they really the highlights of coaching and team managing career? Probably not. It's really about senior success. And I've said before that you don't read much about Manchester United's or Manchester City's under 15s, under 17s. You know, we want people to have long careers in the sport and do well as seniors. And going on to, similarly, I've noticed a trend perhaps, or a good asset that some of our top seniors have, and this is point number 2, bounce back ability, I've called it. You know, they have a great ability to keep success and failure in perspective, and I'm very often pleasantly surprised by how some people can just dust themselves off and crack on to the next target if they've had a bad day, bad race, etc. You know, even within the coaching environment. Last Friday, a week ago Friday, we had an awful training session. Suddenly the track got a bit slippery because it was getting very cold. People just weren't quite on it. They didn't seem quite motivated. First reps were really slow, you know, not just because it was a little bit slippery. Some were not up for it. Yeah, there's a few niggles knocking about, things like that. We had to be careful with. And I wasn't feeling 100% myself. And it just was just one of those nights, just was not very good. And I came home and I said to the wife, I felt really flat about the whole thing. Well, a few days later on the Tuesday, so much better, complete opposite. Everyone was bang on with it, working well together, very positive atmosphere. Times were good as we start to transition between cross country and track. So, you know, it's the same with running. One day does not define you as a runner. Point 3, again, allied to things I've spoken about already, consistency and patience. Time and time again, this comes back. You know, you have to pull yourself back to this. It's boring. You know, it's not very exciting saying you just got to string days together, but that's the fact of it. The biggest successes in the sport from distance running point of view come from those that are able to string consistent training together. They're not even necessarily the best trainers. They just knock off the days and knock off the weeks reliably, and they deal with any setbacks very quickly. We have a few sayings in our group. One is, no matter where you are, whether you've been injured, whether you're flying, whether you're, you know, between those two extremes, you just try and focus on being a little bit better next week than you were this week. And if you do that as many weeks in a row, you could end up being really good, obviously. You know, imagine stringing 50 weeks in a row of consistent work together, how you want it. You're going to be in a pretty good place compared to where you were at the beginning of those 50 weeks. Really try and smash a session. This is a difficult one, especially for younger athletes. You know, the desire to go out there and beat everybody in training is always there when you're in a training group, or even when you're not. You know, if you're looking at Strava, you know, you want to go quicker than somebody else has gone around the circuit, or you're looking at doing better training than others have done. That's not what it's about. Saw a video years ago on FlowTrack. One of the top American distance runners was explaining he was always looking for a B- performance perhaps, or even less in training. Very rarely would go to a B or a B+. What he was saying was, I'm going to keep it steady, or leave a little bit for next time, and just keep knocking them off. Occasionally he will go for a B+, where he's trying to get a race simulation going or something like that. But really, what he's saying is it's not about the session, it's about consistency. And again, to get that consistency, you've got to deal immediately with niggles or illness, communicate with coaches or whoever's supporting you very, very quickly. Time and time again, I hear from athletes, oh, it'll be all right. I know it's not going to be all right. And they do need a bit of protection from themselves sometimes. Now, that might mean taking a rest day. Might be going cross training. It might mean pushing back a session from today to a couple of days' time. That all those things take perhaps more discipline than actually going ahead and pushing yourself through what could be potentially a problem. It sometimes takes more discipline and swallowing your ego a little bit to back off one way or another. I think one good way of doing it, and I'm a bit old school with this, is keep a handwritten training diary. A weekly diary, just jotting down how you felt, what you did, perhaps what your aims are for the next week training wise. I think that's a good discipline to have. It's consistency and patience. Allied to that, all these things, I've got to put target the process as much as the objective. If I said to somebody, an athlete, what's your target for the summer? One of the lads might say, I want to break 2 minutes for 800 meters or 4 minutes for 1500 meters. One of the girls might say, I'd like to be able to run 3000 meters in 10 minutes or whatever. All objective based. Very rarely anyone will say, I'd like to do the best I could at 800 meters, and to do that I'm going to come up every Tuesday, Friday or whatever the days of the week are for the sessions. I'm going to sleep well, eat well, do all the things that might help towards that. Pick my races, plan my races properly. Those are the things that matter. So think of what processes you can put in place to achieve what might be a target, but your objective is to put those processes in place. Number 5, I've put the power of cross-training. Something perhaps back in the day when I was running myself, we didn't think about. We just stopped if we were injured and rested, maybe got some physio. But today, the options are terrific. People have access to bikes, stationary bikes, ellipticals, swimming, aqua running, strengthening areas that perhaps they had a weakness in, all these things. And psychologically and physically can make a huge difference. The moment you're injured, identifying ways and a means of continuing some training without causing further damage, obviously. And I've got a number of examples even recently where athletes have had a few weeks cross-training and come back pretty fit and almost pretty much able to pick up where they left off, or certainly put themselves in a better position of doing that very, very quickly compared to what they would have done if they just had a rest. I do always stress to people, if they are doing cross-training and they want to maintain that fitness, key element is keeping that heart rate up and monitoring that. And sometimes the old watches that monitor the heart rate through the wrist are not that accurate. So having the strap or just stopping and holding your wrist are perhaps the more accurate ways of doing it, and getting that heart rate up high on a regular basis. You can perhaps do it a little bit more than you would with running because the recovery is so much better because you haven't got the impact of some of these cross-training elements. So, and there's plenty on YouTube. You can see people like Eilish McColgan, look her up. There's some great cross-training examples that Eilish put out a few years ago, showing how hard she works on a bike, etc. Or even Jake Whiteman recently. I think his last YouTube was about his cross-training through injury and what he was doing on an elliptical. I would say though, like anything though, if you're young, don't just follow the examples of seniors. Tone it down for what's appropriate for your age and experience of training and your training age almost. Number 6, I've put don't underestimate life stresses. Pretty much all our group at Tunbridge work for a living, they're in full-time employment. Teachers, prison officers, landscape gardeners, whatever it might be. And that brings with it all sorts of stresses, which you should not underestimate can affect how you're feeling in training, both physically and mentally. It can be draining. And I think just with like any injuries, you've got to back off, dial back a fraction if you're feeling run down or struggling. And that might mean just doing the reps slower, might mean pushing back a day, same sort of approach, but you will invariably feel better in a few days' time. Again, it takes discipline and confidence to do that. Number 7, I've put keep your ego in check and focus on yourself. Don't be drawn into how others are doing, whether within your training group, again on Strava or just hearsay, social media, etc. By all means, congratulate them or commiserate with them if they're struggling, but do what is right for you. 90% of our training group, I would say, when we meet up for a training session, take my recommendation of who to run with, who to work with, which subgroup to go in, etc. Sometimes I push people up or suggest I move people up to boost their confidence and just test them out a little bit. Sometimes I might suggest they move down a group so they take it steadier because they're coming back or they've just had a hard week or whatever it might be. So again, it's doing what is, or I might reduce the session. It's doing what's right for them. And you get people that are always in the top group, always in the slowest group. It's the vast majority will float around a little bit and need adaptations. So it's doing what's right for you. One of my first coaches or school teachers actually said pace kills, not distance, which basically means, adjust the pace rather than the volume. Get the session done, even if you have to dial back the pace a little bit. Number 8, importance of recovery. I've touched on it. It might mean a rest day, easy running, cross training, sleep, hydration, eating well. There are dangers in the traditional Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday structure that many universities use or clubs use, etc. I feel it gives only 1 day of recovery between it. So if you've got 3 hard sessions in 5 days, effectively, that is tough for anyone to handle. One of those, I think, has to be a lot steadier. I've had it a lot where people go off to university and it's not the coach's fault. They put on the sessions and people rock up to all 3 of them and they almost race the Thursday night tempo run, as they call it, and not surprisingly are shattered and breaking down. So consciousness of that takes again a lot of discipline to run steadier or run easy on the recovery days. Again, heart rate's good. Don't go beyond a certain heart rate. If it's an easy run and you're young, maybe try. See if you can keep your heart rate at 140 or less. It's quite a challenge to some, especially if you've got a hilly area. Even though one top coach who recommended people walk up hills to avoid elevating their heart rate. But the point is there. What you're trying to achieve from that. You're trying to achieve recovery and moving forward to the next one. Now there is, the old school talks about junk miles, but to be honest, I think you can run a few miles at low heart rate. You're still going to get benefits from it. Eating is particularly important. Snacks afterwards, protein drink, recovery drink, whatever it might be, milk, even milk or whatever, within 20 minutes of finishing your training, really important. But it worries me a bit when club training nights are in the evening, might finish at 8 or gone 8, and then people have got to get home, get something to eat. It can be quite late. They might not bother too much, and that can all build up and cause issues. So having food prepared, planning a little bit is key, because people training hard, they need to probably eat more than they really realise, to be honest. Number 9, looking after yourself. This could be seen as the boring bit. I mentioned eating well, backing off, recovery days. What if it starts to go wrong? Injuries, get a diagnosis if unsure. There's loads of kit available to look after yourself these days, whether it be massage guns, TENS machines, personal ultrasounds. They all cost money, but you could actually borrow them between you. You can just feel jaded, and then it's a case of a process of elimination. And there's a lot more available these days than back in time. I mean, for example, it's only recently I discovered that there were home test kits for iron and ferritin, which cost less than £5 through Amazon. And just give you a check. The only thing that worries me is I think I've recommended it to 5 or 6 people over the last few months, and all of them have come back as low. So I haven't seen a test that says somebody's okay, but perhaps that's why. Perhaps that's because I'm picking on those that have looked jaded. It probably shows how important diet and iron levels are. So that is a port of call, and then it might prompt you then to go and get a full check from a GP or do a more thorough check. And you can get, it costs, but you can get checks from places like Medichecks or Thriva, that's THRIVA, who can do full sports performance checks. And that might show up other aspects. For example, Jake Smith, I mentioned right at the beginning, talking about his overtraining and underfueling and the consequences. His testosterone levels really dropped last summer, and I've had examples where that has happened with males, and that's obviously very important ingredient in performing your strongest. So some GPs are good. You can get an appointment with a GP pretty quick. I think mine would be pretty difficult to get an appointment from quite quickly, just based on sports performance. So things to consider there. Monitoring heart rate, old traditional one, at rest when you first wake up, give you an idea if it's elevated or not, and having a consciousness of that through training on easy runs. People have spotted, post-COVID or something, they can see their heart rate still elevated. Just indicates you just need to back off a little bit. So there's quite a lot you can do there. I think females obviously have to be really even more careful in many respects, with iron and the like. And again, even I listened to a podcast not that long ago where it was an expert on iron intake, was talking about the dangers of having too much iron. So you can't just stuff a load of iron down your throat every day and hope for the best. It has to be absorbed through the stomach lining. I think liquid iron, like Spartone or something, can be better for that, and therefore you can bounce back a bit quicker, but it's also easier on the stomach. If you take too much iron, I believe it can congregate in the stomach, and that can't be good either. So you just have to be a little bit careful, is my layman's understanding of it, how you take it, and get any advice on that. But certainly first port of call quite often if people are really struggling, and that's also obviously linked to diet and how they're replenishing. And finally, number 10, have someone to give feedback to and help with thoughts, and that might be a coach, it might be people in your training group. Could have a chat with each other about how you're feeling, etc. I think with a training group, well, I'm lucky, my group is pretty much 18 to 30, most of them. They're very supportive of each other, quite interested in the sport. They share ideas and thoughts, best practices. It's always good to have somebody in the group who's living a good life and getting some good results, so that helps. People look up to. It's very difficult to do it all on your own, so having some support from others, absolutely key. That's it. That's what I jotted down this morning, replacing the normal preview. Hope it might trigger something with somebody and be of use, and hope you have a good week.